What would you do if you heard footsteps in your house at 2 a.m., knowing your family was asleep upstairs? Most people would hide, call 911, or freeze in terror. But Sarah Martinez wasn't most people. As a former Marine Corps sergeant who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, her instincts kicked in differently. When 3 masked intruders broke into her Phoenix home on that cold November night in 2019, she didn't run. She didn't hide. She fought back with the precision and fury of someone trained to protect what matters most. Armed with nothing but a baseball bat and years of combat experience, Sarah moved through her own home like a predator hunting prey. She took down the first intruder in her living room, disabled the second in her kitchen, and cornered the third in her hallway. For 12 terrifying minutes she was unstoppable, a mother protecting her cubs, a warrior defending her territory. But then something happened that no amount of military training could have prepared her for. As she stood over the final intruder, bat raised and ready to strike, he spoke one word, just one word. And in that instant, everything Sarah thought she knew about that night, about her past, and about herself, came crashing down around her. This is the true story of a night that started as a home invasion and ended as something far more complex. A story about family secrets, the ghosts of war, and the devastating power of a single word to change everything. Sarah Martinez had always been a light sleeper. Even 3 years after leaving the Marines, her body remained on high alert during the quiet hours when most of the world rested peacefully. On this particular Tuesday night, in November 2019, she lay in her Phoenix home listening to the familiar sounds of her neighborhood settling into darkness. The occasional car passing by, the distant hum of air conditioning units, the soft whisper of wind through the desert landscape outside her window. At 34, Sarah had built what she considered a good life after her military service. She worked as a security consultant for local businesses, helping them protect their assets and employees. Her husband, Miguel, worked night shifts at the hospital, which meant Sarah often found herself alone with their 8-year-old daughter, Emma, and 6-year-old son, Carlos. The children slept soundly in their rooms down the hall, their peaceful breathing a constant reminder of why every sacrifice she had made had been worth it. The house itself was modest but comfortable. A 3-bedroom ranch-style home in a quiet residential area. Sarah had chosen it specifically because it sat on a corner lot with good sightlines in all directions. Old habits from her military days made her think about security even in civilian life. She had reinforced the doors, installed motion sensor lights around the perimeter, and kept emergency supplies in strategic locations throughout the house. But on this night, all her preparations would be put to the ultimate test. It was exactly 2:17 a.m. when Sarah heard the first sound that didn't belong, a soft scraping near the back door. So quiet that most people would have dismissed it as a tree branch or small animal. But Sarah's ears were trained to detect the subtle differences between natural and human-made sounds. She lay perfectly still, controlling her breathing and listening intently. There it was again. Metal against metal. Someone was working on her lock. Sarah's military training kicked in immediately. Her heart rate remained steady as adrenaline began flowing through her system. She mentally cataloged the layout of her house, the positions of her children, and the locations of potential weapons. The baseball bat Miguel used for weekend games with the kids was leaning against the wall in their bedroom. Her service pistol was locked in a gun safe in the closet, too far away and too time-consuming to access quietly. Moving like a shadow, Sarah slipped out of bed and grabbed the aluminum bat. She had learned long ago that in crisis situations, simple weapons were often the most effective. The bat was lightweight, easy to maneuver in close quarters, and required no ammunition or complicated operation. As she moved toward the bedroom door, Sarah could hear more sounds from the back of the house. Multiple sets of footsteps, whispered conversations, the soft click of her back door finally giving way to their efforts. At least 3 people, maybe more. They were trying to be quiet, but they weren't professionals. Real professionals would have been completely silent. Sarah paused at her bedroom door, pressing her ear against the wood. The intruders were inside now, moving through her kitchen toward the living room. She could hear them bumping into furniture, unfamiliar with the layout of her home. This gave her a significant advantage. She knew every inch of this house, could navigate it blindfolded if necessary. But her primary concern wasn't fighting the intruders. It was protecting her children. Emma and Carlos slept in bedrooms on the opposite end of the house from the master bedroom. To reach them, The intruders would have to pass through the living room, down a hallway, and past Sarah's position. She could use this geography to her advantage, creating a choke point where she could engage them one at a time rather than facing multiple opponents simultaneously. Sarah opened her bedroom door just wide enough to slip through, then moved silently down the hallway toward the living room. Years of military training had taught her how to move without making sound, how to use shadows and cover, how to remain invisible even in familiar territory. The intruders had no idea they were being hunted. As she reached the edge of the living room, Sarah could see 3 figures moving around in the darkness. They wore dark clothing and had covered their faces with bandanas or masks. 2 of them were searching through drawers and cabinets looking for valuables. The third stood near the front window, apparently acting as a lookout. Sarah studied their movements, assessing their skill level and potential threat. They were amateurs, probably looking for quick cash or items they could sell. But amateurs could be dangerous in their own way, unpredictable and likely to panic when confronted. The lookout near the window turned away from his post, distracted by something his partners were doing. This was Sarah's opportunity. Moving with practiced precision, Sarah stepped into the living room behind the nearest intruder. He was bent over her entertainment center, rifling through the contents of a cabinet. Sarah raised the bat and brought it down across his shoulders and upper back with controlled force. Not enough to kill, but definitely enough to disable. The man dropped to the floor with a strangled cry, his body convulsing as pain shot through his nervous system. The sound alerted his companions, who spun around to face this unexpected threat. "What the hell?" shouted the second intruder, a thin man with quick nervous movements. He had been searching through Sarah's bookshelf, looking for hidden valuables. The third man, the former lookout, was bigger and seemed more confident than his partners. He took a step toward Sarah, trying to assess the situation in the dim light filtering through the windows. "Lady, just back off," he said, his voice attempting to sound threatening but carrying an undertone of uncertainty. "We don't want to hurt anyone. Just give us what we want and we'll leave." Sarah said nothing. She had learned in combat that talking often gave away tactical advantages. Instead, she shifted her position slightly, moving so that the couch was between her and the bigger man while keeping the second intruder in her peripheral vision. The injured man on the floor was trying to crawl toward the kitchen, making soft, groaning sounds. Sarah had struck him precisely at the nerve cluster between his shoulder blades, temporarily paralyzing the muscles in his upper body. He would recover, but not quickly enough to rejoin the fight. "I said back off," the big man repeated, reaching into his jacket. Sarah saw the outline of a weapon being drawn and reacted instantly. She vaulted over the couch with fluid grace, closing the distance between herself and the second intruder before either man could respond. The bat connected with his wrist as he tried to raise his hands defensively, and Sarah heard the satisfying crack of bone breaking. He screamed and dropped to his knees, clutching his injured arm. The big man had his weapon out now, but Sarah was already moving. She rolled behind her dining room table, using it as cover while she planned her next move. The table was solid wood, heavy enough to stop most handgun rounds if necessary. "You picked the wrong house," Sarah called out, her voice calm and controlled despite the chaos around her. "You can leave now and get medical attention for your friends, or this can get a lot worse for all of you." "You crazy witch!" the big man shouted back. "Do you know who you're messing with?" Sarah almost smiled at that question. These amateur criminals had no idea that they had chosen to rob the home of someone who had spent years fighting insurgents in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Compared to coordinated attacks by trained fighters armed with military weapons, 3 bumbling burglars seemed almost manageable. But she couldn't let her guard down. Desperate people were often the most dangerous, and cornered amateurs might do something unpredictably violent. The big man started moving around the table, trying to get a clear shot at Sarah's position. She could hear his heavy footsteps and labored breathing. He was scared now, probably realizing that this simple burglary had turned into something much more complicated. Sarah waited until he was committed to his path around the left side of the table, then exploded out from the right side. She came up behind him while he was still looking for her in her previous position. The bat struck the back of his knees, sending him tumbling forward onto the hardwood floor. His weapon skittered away across the floor, disappearing under Sarah's china cabinet. The big man tried to get up, but Sarah was already on him, pressing the bat across his throat just hard enough to make breathing difficult without cutting off his air supply completely. "Stay down," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The man on the floor stopped struggling, apparently recognizing that he was dealing with someone far beyond his ability to handle. His two companions were in no condition to help him. One was still partially paralyzed on the living room floor, and the other was curled up near the bookshelf, cradling his broken wrist and making sounds of pain. Sarah maintained her position of control while mentally reviewing the situation. She had successfully neutralized 3 intruders without serious injury to herself or damage to her property. Her children remained safe in their bedrooms, hopefully still sleeping through the commotion. The immediate threat was contained, but something felt wrong about the whole situation. These men hadn't acted like typical burglars. They seemed to know her house layout better than random criminals should. They had disabled her security system with surprising efficiency, and there was something familiar about the voice of the man she now held pinned to the floor, though she couldn't place where she might have heard it before. As Sarah considered calling 911 to report the break-in, she heard a new sound from the back of the house. Footsteps. Careful, measured, professional footsteps moving down the hallway toward her children's bedrooms. There had been a 4th intruder. Sarah's blood went cold as she realized her mistake. While she had been focused on the 3 obvious threats in her living room, someone else had entered through a different access point and was now moving toward Emma and Carlos. The 3 men she had fought were decoys, distractions meant to keep her occupied, while the real threat approached her children. Without hesitation, Sarah abandoned her position over the big man and sprinted toward the hallway. The bat felt impossibly heavy in her hands as she ran toward the most important fight of her life. Behind her, she could hear the big man getting to his feet, but she didn't care about him anymore. Nothing mattered except reaching her children before the 4th intruder did. As she rounded the corner into the hallway, Sarah saw a figure dressed in black standing outside Emma's bedroom door. Unlike the others, this person moved with military precision, checking corners and maintaining proper tactical positioning. This was someone with real training, someone who knew what they were doing. The figure heard Sarah's approach and turned to face her. In the dim light of the hallway, she could see that this intruder was different from the others. Taller, more composed, carrying themselves with the confidence of a professional. Sarah raised the bat and charged forward, ready to fight with everything she had to protect her children. But as the figure stepped into the pale light coming through the window at the end of the hall, something made Sarah hesitate. There was something familiar about the way this person moved, something that triggered a memory she couldn't quite place. For just a moment, her certainty wavered, and in that moment of hesitation, the 4th intruder spoke. "Mama." That single word hit Sarah like a physical blow, stopping her mid-charge as if she had run into an invisible wall. The bat trembled in her hands as her mind struggled to process what she had just heard. It was impossible. It couldn't be real. But the voice that had spoken that word was one she had heard every day for the first 18 years of her life. The figure in the hallway slowly reached up and pulled away the black mask covering their face, revealing features that Sarah knew better than her own. Standing before her, after 12 years of believing he was dead, was her younger brother, David. Sarah's legs nearly gave out beneath her. The bat slipped from her numb fingers and clattered to the floor. David looked older, harder than when she had last seen him. His face was scarred, his hair shorter, his body carrying the lean muscle of someone who had spent years in dangerous places. But it was undeniably him. "Hello, Sarah," David said quietly, his voice carrying emotions she couldn't begin to interpret. Relief, fear, regret, love, and something darker all mixed together. "You're dead," Sarah whispered, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "You died in Syria. I got the letter. I went to your funeral." David's face twisted with pain at her words. "I know what you were told. I know what everyone was told. But it was necessary. I had to disappear. Had to let everyone think I was gone. So..." Sarah's mind reeled as she tried to make sense of what was happening. David had been a Marine like her, but he had gone into Special Forces after his initial enlistment. His missions had become increasingly classified, and their communication had grown sporadic in the months before his supposed death. The official story was that his unit had been ambushed while conducting reconnaissance in Syria. No bodies had been recovered due to the dangerous nature of the area, but the evidence indicated that no one had survived. Why? Sarah asked, her voice breaking. Why would you let us think you were dead? Do you know what that did to Mom and Dad? Do you know what it did to me? David took a small step closer, his hands visible and empty, showing that he wasn't armed. I couldn't tell anyone. If I had made contact with family, it would have put you all in danger. The people I was working to stop, they would have used you against me. What people? What are you talking about? It's complicated, Sarah. After Syria, I was recruited for a deep cover operation, black ops stuff that doesn't officially exist. I've been tracking an international smuggling ring that has connections reaching into the highest levels of government and military. They move weapons, drugs, people, anything that generates profit. And they kill anyone who gets too close to exposing them. Sarah struggled to process this information. The brother, she remembered, had been idealistic, committed to serving his country through legitimate military channels. The idea that he would be involved in some shadow world of espionage and international crime seemed impossible. So you faked your death and became some kind of spy? She asked, skepticism clear in her voice. I didn't have a choice, David replied, his voice defensive. My unit stumbled onto something in Syria that we weren't supposed to see, a meeting between American military contractors and known terrorists, exchanging weapons for intelligence about troop movements. When I tried to report it through official channels, I found out that the corruption went all the way to the top. Someone put a kill order out on my entire unit. The pieces of David's story were starting to fit together in Sarah's mind, but they created a picture she didn't want to believe. So you faked your death to escape the kill order? My handler arranged it, made it look like we were all killed in an ambush, gave me a new identity, and put me to work tracking down the network responsible. I've been living under deep cover for 12 years, getting close to the people involved, gathering evidence. Sarah looked down the hallway toward her children's rooms, suddenly remembering why David was here in the first place. What does any of this have to do with my house, with my kids? David's expression grew grave. 3 days ago, someone in the network found out who I really am. They discovered that David Martinez supposedly died in Syria, but had a sister living in Phoenix. They put together that Sarah Martinez, former Marine turned security consultant, might be connected to the operative who has been causing them problems. So they sent those men to kill me? No, David said, shaking his head. They sent those men to kidnap your children. They want to use Emma and Carlos as leverage to force me to give up everything I know about their operation. The 3 men in your living room were supposed to grab the kids while you were dealing with them. I was supposed to be the 4th man, the one who actually took Emma and Carlos. Sarah felt a cold fury building in her chest. The idea that anyone would threaten her children was bad enough, but knowing that her own brother had been part of the plan made it almost unbearable. You were going to kidnap my children? She asked, her voice deadly quiet. I had to make them think I was still loyal to their cause, David said quickly. But I was never going to let them hurt Emma and Carlos. I'd been planning this for weeks, trying to find a way to protect you all while maintaining my cover. By breaking into my house in the middle of the night with 3 criminals? I had to make it look real, but I also had to make sure you were ready for what was coming. I knew you would fight back, knew you could handle those 3 amateurs. I was counting on it. Sarah picked up the bat from where she had dropped it, gripping it tightly as she tried to control her anger. You used me as bait. You put my children in danger to protect your mission. I put you in a controlled situation where I knew you could win, David corrected. If I had just shown up at your door and told you this story, would you have believed me? Would you have taken the precautions necessary to protect yourself and the kids? Sarah had to admit that he had a point. If someone claiming to be her dead brother had appeared with a wild story about government conspiracies and international crime syndicates, she would have been skeptical at best. But seeing him in action, witnessing the professional way he moved and fought, made his story more credible. What happens now? She asked. Now we disappear, David said. All of us. I've got clean identities prepared, safe houses set up, money hidden in accounts they can't trace. We can start over somewhere they'll never find us. I can't just disappear. I have a life here. Miguel, the kids' school, my job. Miguel is already in danger just by being married to you, David interrupted. And Emma and Carlos will never be safe as long as this network exists. They've seen what I can do to their operations, and they know that killing me won't stop what I've set in motion. But they also know that hurting my family is the one thing that might make me back down. Sarah looked toward her children's bedrooms again, thinking about Emma and Carlos sleeping peacefully, unaware that their entire world was about to change. How do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know this isn't all some elaborate lie? David reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. Everything I've gathered over the past 12 years is in here. Names, dates, financial records, photographs, audio recordings, enough evidence to bring down dozens of people in government and military positions. I was planning to turn it over to a journalist I trust, someone who could expose the whole network without getting killed in the process. Sarah took the envelope and opened it, scanning the contents in the dim light of the hallway. What she saw made her stomach turn. Photographs of American officials meeting with known terrorists. Financial records showing weapons sales to enemy forces. Communication intercepts proving that some American military operations had been deliberately compromised for profit. "My God," she whispered. "This is all real?" "Every bit of it," David confirmed. "And there's more where that came from. But the people involved know I have this evidence, and they're willing to do anything to stop me from using it." A sound from the living room reminded Sarah that they weren't alone in the house. The 3 intruders she had fought were still there, and at least one of them was mobile. "What about them?" she asked, nodding toward the front of the house. "They're not important," David said. "Low-level thugs hired for this specific job. They don't know anything about the bigger operation, but we need to deal with them before we can leave." "Deal with them how?" David's expression grew cold in a way that made Sarah remember that whatever he had been doing for the past 12 years had probably involved killing people. They've seen too much. They know about Emma and Carlos. Know where you live. If we let them go, they'll report back to their employers. Sarah understood what he was suggesting, and it made her sick. "I'm not a killer, David. I won't murder 3 men who are no real threat to us." "Then what do you propose? Call the police?" "How do you explain this situation without exposing everything? And how do you know there aren't people in the police department who are working with the network?" It was a good point, but Sarah refused to accept that murder was their only option. "We tie them up, leave them here, and disappear, like you suggested. By the time they get free or someone finds them, we'll be long gone." David looked like he wanted to argue, but he apparently recognized the determination in Sarah's voice. "But we need to move fast. There are other people coming, and they won't be as easy to handle as these 3. "What other people?" "The network didn't trust this operation to amateurs. They have a cleanup crew following about an hour behind. Professionals who are supposed to make sure the job gets done right if these idiots screwed it up." Sarah felt her heart rate spike as she realized how little time they had. "An hour? How long have they been here?" David checked his watch. "About 40 minutes. Which means we have maybe 20 minutes to secure these 3, wake up the kids, get Miguel from the hospital, and disappear forever." The impossibility of the timeline hit Sarah like a physical blow. Even if everything went perfectly, they couldn't possibly accomplish all of that in 20 minutes, and nothing ever went perfectly in situations like this. "We need to call Miguel," she said, already moving toward her bedroom to get her phone. "No," David said, catching her arm. "Phone calls can be traced, tracked, intercepted. If the network has any kind of electronic surveillance in place, calling Miguel will just tell them where he is and put him in immediate danger. So what do we do? Just leave him?" "I've got people watching the hospital. If Miguel is in immediate danger, they'll extract him and bring him to our rendezvous point. But right now, our priority has to be getting you and the kids to safety." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to insist on protecting her husband, but she also knew that David was right about priorities. If Emma and Carlos fell into the hands of these criminals, everything else would be meaningless. "All right," she said reluctantly, "but I want your promise that Miguel will be protected." "You have it," David replied without hesitation. As they moved back toward the living room to secure the 3 intruders, Sarah's mind raced through everything that would have to be abandoned. Her home, her job, her friends, the life she had spent years building after leaving the military. All of it would be gone in the next 20 minutes, sacrificed to protect her family from threats she had never even known existed. But as she looked at her brother, alive after 12 years of believing he was dead, Sarah realized that some things were worth any sacrifice. Family was worth everything. And if disappearing forever was the price of keeping Emma and Carlos safe, she would pay it without hesitation. The only question now was whether 20 minutes would be enough time to save them all. Moving back into the living room with David beside her felt surreal to Sarah. Just minutes ago, she had been fighting for her life against 3 intruders. Now she was working alongside her supposedly dead brother to secure those same men before fleeing into the night with her children. The rapid shifts in reality made her feel like she was trapped in some kind of fever dream. The 3 men were in various states of injury and consciousness. The first one she had struck was sitting up against the wall, his arms wrapped around his torso as he struggled with the lingering effects of nerve damage. The second man, whose wrist Sarah had broken with the bat, was curled up on the floor making soft, whimpering sounds. The third, the big man who had drawn a weapon, was on his feet but moving carefully, clearly in pain from where Sarah had taken out his knees. "Nobody move," David commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "You're going to sit quietly while we figure out how to handle this situation." The big man looked up at David with confusion and anger. "What the hell, Marcus? You said this was going to be easy. You said the woman would be asleep and we'd just grab the kids and go." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine at hearing David referred to by another name, Marcus. The name meant nothing to her, but it was apparently the identity he had been using while infiltrating the criminal network. "Plans change," David replied coldly. "Sometimes you have to adapt to circumstances." "Adapt?" "She broke Tommy's wrist and messed up Rico pretty bad. And for what? We don't even have the kids." David's jaw tightened at the mention of Emma and Carlos. Sarah could see him struggling to maintain his cover while also dealing with the reality that these men had come here to kidnap his niece and nephew. "The operation got complicated," David said finally. "But we're going to salvage what we can and get out of here." Sarah understood that David was still trying to maintain his undercover identity, but she didn't have time for games. She grabbed a roll of duct tape from a drawer in the kitchen and tossed it to David. "Tie them up," she said bluntly. "We don't have time for whatever performance you're putting on." The big man's eyes widened as he suddenly understood that something fundamental had changed in the dynamic between David and Sarah. "Wait a minute. What's going on here? Marcus, why is she giving you orders?" David caught the roll of duct tape and looked at the 3 men with an expression that combined regret and determination. "Because Marcus doesn't exist. He never did. I've been working undercover for 12 years, and tonight my cover gets blown along with everything else." The revelation hit the 3 criminals like a physical blow. Sarah could see the fear and anger building in their faces as they realized they had been betrayed by someone they thought was their ally. "You're a cop?" the big man asked, his voice shaking with rage. "Not exactly," David replied as he began securing the man's hands behind his back with duct tape, "but close enough that you're all going to prison for a very long time. The bosses are going to kill you for this," the man with the broken wrist said through gritted teeth. "They'll hunt you down and make you pay. They're welcome to try," David said calmly as he moved on to secure the second man. "But first they'll have to find me, and I've gotten very good at staying hidden over the past 12 years. Sarah moved to secure the third man, the one she had initially disabled with the bat. He was still weak from the nerve damage, offering little resistance as she bound his hands and feet. "How much time do we have?" she asked David as they finished restraining the intruders. David checked his watch again, and Sarah could see tension in his shoulders. "Maybe 15 minutes before the cleanup crew arrives. Probably less." "Then we need to move now." Sarah hurried down the hallway to Emma's room first. Her 8-year-old daughter was sleeping peacefully, her dark hair spread across her pillow like a fan. Sarah hated to wake her, hated to drag her into this nightmare, but there was no choice. "Emma, sweetheart, wake up," Sarah said softly, gently shaking her daughter's shoulder. Emma's eyes opened slowly, unfocused with sleep. "Mama? What time is it?" "It's late, baby, but we need to go somewhere. Can you get dressed quickly? Just put on whatever clothes are closest." Something in Sarah's voice must have communicated the urgency of the situation, because Emma sat up immediately, suddenly alert. "Are we in trouble?" "No, sweetheart, but we need to leave the house for a little while. I'll explain everything later, but right now I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say." Emma nodded solemnly and began pulling clothes from her dresser. Sarah moved to Carlos's room next, finding her 6-year-old son harder to wake but equally cooperative once he understood that something important was happening. While the children got dressed, Sarah quickly packed a bag with essential items, Medications, important documents, some clothes, and a few comfort items for Emma and Carlos. Everything else would have to be left behind. David appeared in the doorway as Sarah finished packing. "Vehicle's ready," he said quietly. Black SUV parked 3 blocks away. Clean plates, full tank, everything we need for the first leg of the journey. "What about Miguel?" "My people are moving to extract him now. He'll be brought to the first safe house within 6 hours. Sarah wanted more details, wanted reassurance that her husband would be safe, but she could see from David's expression that they were out of time for lengthy explanations. Emma appeared in the hallway, fully dressed and carrying her favorite stuffed animal. Carlos was right behind her, looking confused and scared but trying to be brave. "Who's that man, Mama?" Emma asked, noticing David for the first time. Sarah knelt down so she was at eye level with both her children. This was the moment she had been dreading, trying to explain the impossible to 2 kids who deserved so much better than to be dragged into this nightmare. "Emma, Carlos, this is your Uncle David. He's my brother, and he's here to help us." "But Uncle David died," Carlos said, his 6-year-old logic struggling with the contradiction. "You told us he died in the war." "I thought he had died," Sarah said carefully, "but he was actually working on a very important job, and he had to pretend to be dead to keep everyone safe. Now he's here to help keep us safe too." Emma studied David with the serious expression she wore when trying to understand adult concepts that didn't quite make sense. "Why do we need to be kept safe?" David knelt down beside Sarah, his face softening as he looked at his niece and nephew for the first time. "Because there are some bad people who want to hurt our family. But I promise you that I'm going to make sure nothing happens to you or your mom or your dad." "Are we going to see Daddy?" Carlos asked. "Yes," David said firmly. "Very soon. But right now we need to go somewhere safe while I make sure the bad people can't find us." Sarah could see that both children had more questions, but there simply wasn't time to answer them. She stood up and took each child by the hand. "I know this is scary and confusing," she said, "but I need you both to be very brave and very quiet until we get somewhere safe. Can you do that for me?" Both children nodded solemnly, and Sarah felt her heart break a little at how quickly they were being forced to grow up. David led them toward the back door, moving carefully to avoid the 3 bound men in the living room. As they passed through the kitchen, Sarah grabbed a knife from the block on her counter, tucking it into her jacket. "See what's up with you." David noticed the action and nodded approvingly. The back door opened onto Sarah's small yard, which was surrounded by a 6-foot privacy fence. David moved first, checking for any signs of surveillance or ambush. The yard appeared clear, but Sarah could see the tension in his movements as he scanned the shadows. "Stay close," David whispered as he led them through a gate in the back fence that Sarah hadn't even known existed. David must have prepared this escape route in advance, probably during his surveillance of the house while planning this operation. They moved through a narrow alley that ran behind the houses on Sarah's street. David moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going, leading them through a maze of residential streets toward their extraction point. Emma and Carlos stayed close to Sarah, their small hands gripping hers tightly. She could feel them trembling, whether from cold or fear she couldn't tell, probably both. As they walked, Sarah's mind raced through everything that had just happened and everything that was about to happen. In the span of less than an hour, her entire life had been turned upside down. Her dead brother was alive. Her family was being hunted by international criminals. Her husband was in danger. Her children were being forced to flee their home in the middle of the night. But underneath all the fear and confusion, Sarah felt something else: relief. For 12 years, she had carried the guilt and grief of losing David. She had blamed herself for not being there when he needed her, for not somehow preventing his death. Now she knew that he had been alive all along, fighting his own battles, protecting people in ways she could never have imagined. How much further? She asked quietly, as they turned onto another residential street. 2 more blocks, David replied, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Vehicle should be right where I left it. As they walked, Sarah noticed details about her brother that she hadn't had time to process during the chaos in her house. His movements were different now, more controlled and precise than she remembered. His eyes never stopped moving, constantly assessing threats and escape routes. Whatever he had been doing for the past 12 years had changed him from the idealistic young Marine she remembered into something harder and more dangerous. But underneath all that professional competence, she could still see flashes of the brother she had grown up with. The way he positioned himself protectively between her children and any potential threats. The gentle tone he used when speaking to Emma and Carlos. The concerned glances he kept shooting in Sarah's direction to make sure she was holding up under the stress. "There," David said, pointing to a black SUV parked under a broken streetlight. "That's our ride." The vehicle looked ordinary enough, the kind of mid-sized SUV that thousands of families drove every day. But as they approached, Sarah could see subtle modifications that marked it as something more than a typical family vehicle. Tinted windows that were probably bulletproof, heavy-duty tires that could handle rough terrain, a slightly reinforced frame that suggested armor plating. David produced keys and unlocked the vehicle, quickly checking the interior before motioning for Sarah and the children to get in. As they settled into their seats, Sarah noticed that the SUV was equipped with professional-grade communication equipment and what looked like a small arsenal of weapons secured in hidden compartments. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked as David started the engine. "First stop is a safe house about 2 hours north of here," David replied, pulling away from the curb and beginning to navigate through residential streets toward the highway. "From there, we'll reassess the situation and decide on our next move." "What about Miguel?" "My team will extract him from the hospital within the hour. They'll bring him to the safe house by a different route, make sure he's not followed." Sarah wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the husband she loved would be safe. But she also knew that David had been living in a world of deception and violence for 12 years, and she wondered if he had become so accustomed to that world that he might be underestimating the dangers they all faced. As they drove through the quiet streets of Phoenix, Sarah looked back at her children in the rear seat. Emma was staring out the window with wide eyes, trying to process everything she was seeing and hearing. Carlos had fallen asleep against his sister's shoulder, exhausted by the stress and confusion of the night. "What happens after the safe house?" Sarah asked. "Do we just keep running forever?" David was quiet for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he considered his answer. "That depends on what we decide to do with the evidence I've collected. If we turn it over to the right people, if we can expose this network and bring down the people involved, then maybe we can have normal lives again. And if we can't, then yes," David said quietly, "we keep running forever." Sarah closed her eyes and tried to imagine a life of constant movement, constant fear, never being able to settle down or feel safe. It seemed like an impossible way to live, especially with children. But as she thought about the alternative, about Emma and Carlos being kidnapped and used as leverage against David, she knew that running was still better than the other options available to them. The SUV reached the highway and David accelerated toward the mountains north of Phoenix, carrying them all toward an uncertain future but away from the immediate danger that had shattered their lives. Behind them, the city lights of Phoenix faded into the darkness, along with everything Sarah had worked to build since leaving the Marines. Ahead lay only questions, and the hope that somehow they might find a way to survive what was coming next. The safe house was nothing like what Sarah had expected. Instead of some grim warehouse or abandoned building, David led them to a comfortable ranch-style home nestled in the foothills north of Phoenix. Solar panels on the roof and a well-maintained garden made it look like the residence of environmentally conscious retirees, not a hideout for people fleeing international criminals. "Appearances matter," David explained as he led them through a front door that Sarah noticed was reinforced steel disguised to look like wood. "The best hiding places are the ones that look completely ordinary." Inside, the house was efficiently organized with multiple communication stations, computer equipment, and what appeared to be enough supplies to sustain several people for weeks or even months. But it also had comfortable furniture, a well-stocked kitchen, and bedrooms that looked like they belonged in a normal family home. Emma and Carlos were exhausted from the night's events, and Sarah was grateful when David showed them to a bedroom with twin beds where they could finally get some rest. As she tucked them in, both children peppered her with questions she didn't know how to answer. "When are we going home, Mama?" Carlos asked, his 6-year-old mind struggling to understand why they had left everything familiar behind. "I don't know, sweetheart," Sarah answered honestly, "but wherever we go, we'll be together, and that's what matters most." Emma, always more perceptive than her age would suggest, asked the question Sarah had been dreading. "Are we ever going home?" Sarah sat on the edge of Emma's bed and smoothed her daughter's hair, trying to find words that would be truthful without being terrifying. "Our old home might not be safe anymore, but home isn't really a place, Emma. Home is being with the people you love. As long as we're together, we'll always have a home." It wasn't really an answer, and Sarah could see that Emma knew it, but her daughter nodded solemnly and closed her eyes, apparently deciding to trust that her mother would find a way to make everything work out. After the children were asleep, Sarah found David in the kitchen making coffee with the focused concentration of someone performing a familiar ritual. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment she saw exhaustion in his face that made him look every one of his years. "How are you holding up?" he asked, handing her a steaming mug. "I don't know," Sarah replied honestly. "6 hours ago, my biggest worry was whether Emma had finished her homework. Now I'm sitting in a safe house with my supposedly dead brother, while my children sleep in a strange bed and my husband is missing." "Miguel isn't missing," David said firmly. "My team extracted him from the hospital 3 hours ago. He's safe and he'll be here by morning." "Your team?" Sarah repeated. "Who exactly are these people you're working with? How do I know they're not part of whatever network you've been fighting?" David set down his coffee mug and studied his sister's face. Sarah could see him weighing how much to tell her, calculating what she needed to know versus what might put her in additional danger. "After Syria, when I realized how deep the corruption went, I was recruited by a group that operates outside normal government channels. Think of us as a shadow organization within the intelligence community. People who are loyal to the country rather than to any particular administration or agency." "So you're some kind of spy?" "More like a troubleshooter. When official channels can't handle a problem because of political considerations or corruption, my group steps in to handle it unofficially." Sarah processed this information while studying her brother's face. The David she remembered had been straightforward, someone who believed in following rules and working within the system. The man sitting across from her now spoke casually about operating outside government oversight and taking extra legal action. "How many people have you killed?" she asked suddenly. David's coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. He set it down carefully and was quiet for a long moment. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me. You're asking me to trust you with my children's lives. I need to know who you've become. I've done what was necessary to protect innocent people from criminals who operate with impunity because they have government connections," David said finally. "I don't keep count, and I don't lose sleep over it." Sarah believed him about not losing sleep, which disturbed her more than she wanted to admit. The brother she remembered had been deeply moral, someone who agonized over difficult decisions. This David seemed to have developed the kind of cold pragmatism that came from years of making impossible choices. "Tell me about this network you've been fighting," she said, changing the subject before it could become more uncomfortable. David pulled out a laptop and opened it on the kitchen table. The screen displayed a complex network diagram showing connections between government officials, military contractors, international arms dealers, and various criminal organizations. "It started small," David explained. "Individual military officers selling weapons or information for personal profit. But over the years, it grew into something much larger. Now we're talking about a coordinated conspiracy that reaches into the Pentagon, the CIA, the State Department, and several major defense contractors." Sarah studied the diagram, recognizing some of the names from her own military service and from news reports over the years. "How much money are we talking about?" "Billions. They've been selling American weapons to insurgent groups, then using the profits to buy influence with politicians and military leaders. They've deliberately sabotaged American operations to create more demand for private military contractors. They've even staged terrorist attacks to justify increased defense spending that flows back to companies they control." The scope of what David was describing made Sarah feel sick. "And you've been gathering evidence of all this for 12 years? "Evidence, yes, but also working to disrupt their operations whenever possible. I've prevented weapons shipments, exposed corrupt officials, eliminated key players when necessary. But the network always adapts, brings in new people, finds new ways to operate. So why come forward now? Why risk exposure after all this time?" David's expression grew grim. "Because they're planning something big. Something that will make everything they've done before look like small-time corruption. They're going to stage a major terrorist attack on American soil, then use the aftermath to implement a level of government control that would make this country unrecognizable. Sarah felt a chill run through her as she grasped the implications of what David was telling her. When? Soon, within the next few weeks, according to the intelligence I've gathered. That's why I had to break cover, why I had to risk exposing myself. If this attack succeeds, there won't be any country left worth protecting. What kind of attack? David hesitated, clearly reluctant to share details that would put Sarah in even more danger. But she could see in his eyes that he needed her help, that he couldn't stop what was coming alone. They've acquired a small nuclear device from Pakistani sources. Nothing that would destroy a major city, but enough to kill thousands of people and create the kind of fear that would justify martial law and suspension of constitutional rights. Sarah's coffee mug slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet house, and she found herself listening for any indication that it had woken Emma and Carlos. "A nuclear bomb," she whispered. "On American soil. A dirty bomb, technically. Conventional explosives wrapped around radioactive material. It would contaminate several city blocks for decades, but more importantly, it would create the psychological impact they need to reshape American society. Where? When? I don't have all the details yet. That's what I was trying to learn when they discovered my real identity. But based on the intelligence I've gathered, the target is probably Washington, D.C. during some kind of major public event that would maximize casualties and media coverage." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. If David was right, thousands of innocent people were going to die unless someone stopped this attack. But if he was wrong, or if this was all some elaborate deception, she was risking her children's lives for nothing. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" she asked. "How do I know this isn't all part of some deeper conspiracy?" David reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a modified smartphone. "This contains everything I've collected over the past 12 years. Financial records, communication intercepts, photographs, video recordings, testimony from sources inside the network. You can examine all of it. Verify whatever you want to verify." Sarah took the device and began scrolling through its contents. What she saw made her stomach turn. Clear evidence of American officials working with known terrorists. Financial records showing massive bribes and kickbacks. Communication intercepts proving that several recent terrorist attacks had been allowed to succeed for political purposes. "Even if all this is real," Sarah said finally, "what can we do about it? You're one person against a massive conspiracy that includes people at the highest levels of government." "I'm not one person anymore," David replied. "I have you. And I have a plan to expose everything in a way that can't be covered up or dismissed." "What kind of plan?" David opened another file on the laptop, showing what appeared to be a detailed operational outline. "There's going to be a classified briefing at the Pentagon in 4 days. All the key players in the conspiracy will be there, including the people coordinating the nuclear attack. If we can get this evidence to the right person at the right time, we can bring down the entire network and prevent the attack." "Who's the right person?" "General Patricia Morrison. She's one of the few high-ranking officials who isn't compromised by the conspiracy. If she sees this evidence during the briefing, she'll have the authority and credibility to act on it immediately." Sarah studied the plan, looking for flaws and potential problems. How do we get close enough to Morrison to share this evidence? How do we even get into the Pentagon? David smiled for the first time since revealing himself to Sarah, and she recognized something of the confident younger brother she remembered. "That's where you come in. Your security consulting business has given you contracts with several defense contractors who will be represented at this briefing. You have legitimate reasons to be in the Pentagon, and you have the security clearance necessary to access classified briefings. My clearance expired 2 years ago. I've had it reactivated. As far as the Pentagon computer systems are concerned, you're consulting on a classified project related to base security upgrades." Sarah realized that David had been planning this for much longer than she had initially understood. "How long have you been manipulating my life?" "I haven't been manipulating you," David said defensively. "I've been protecting you while also positioning you to help when the time came. Everything that's happened to your career, your contracts, your security clearances has been legitimate. I just made sure the right opportunities came your way. The right opportunities, Sarah repeated. My entire adult life has been shaped by my dead brother pulling strings behind the scenes. Your life has been shaped by your own choices and your own competence, David corrected. I just made sure you had the chance to make those choices. Before Sarah could respond, they heard the sound of a vehicle approaching the safe house. David immediately moved to a window, peering through bulletproof glass at the driveway outside. It's Miguel, he said with relief. My team got him out safely. Sarah rushed to the front door as it opened to admit her husband, who looked exhausted and confused but unharmed. Miguel's eyes widened as he saw Sarah, then widened even more as he noticed David standing behind her. Sarah, what the hell is going on? Miguel asked, pulling his wife into a tight embrace. Men with guns showed up at the hospital and told me I had to come with them immediately. They said you and the kids were in danger, but they wouldn't explain anything else. Sarah looked at David, suddenly realizing that they were going to have to explain this entire situation to Miguel, a man who knew nothing about government conspiracies or international crime networks. Miguel was a nurse, someone who believed in helping people through legitimate medical care. The idea that his wife's supposedly dead brother was actually an undercover operative fighting a shadow war against government corruption was going to be almost impossible for him to accept. Sit down, honey, Sarah said gently. We have a lot to talk about. As Sarah began the difficult process of explaining everything that had happened, she couldn't help but wonder if David's plan had any real chance of success. Even if they could expose the conspiracy, even if they could prevent the nuclear attack, what kind of life would be left for her family afterward? How could they ever return to normal after being involved in something like this? But as she looked at Miguel's concerned face and thought about Emma and Carlos sleeping in the next room, Sarah realized that normal wasn't really an option anymore. The only choice now was between fighting back against the forces that threatened everything she loved or spending the rest of their lives running and hiding. And Sarah Martinez had never been very good at running away from a fight. 4 days later, Sarah stood outside the Pentagon wearing a crisp business suit and carrying a briefcase containing enough evidence to bring down a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American government. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled, but her heart was pounding as she approached the security checkpoint that would either lead to justice or to her family's destruction. The past 4 days at the safe house had been a whirlwind of preparation, planning, and painful conversations. Miguel had struggled to accept the reality of what they were facing, oscillating between disbelief and anger as David laid out the full scope of the conspiracy. Emma and Carlos had adapted with the remarkable resilience of children, treating their stay at the safe house like an unexpected adventure while remaining blissfully unaware of the stakes involved. Sarah had spent those days studying every piece of evidence David had collected, memorizing names and faces, understanding the complex web of corruption and criminal activity that threatened not just her family, but the entire country. The more she learned, the more she understood why David had been willing to sacrifice 12 years of his life to fight this network. Now, as she walked through the Pentagon's corridors toward the classified briefing room, Sarah carried the weight of that knowledge and the responsibility for acting on it. David was somewhere else in the building, having gained access through different channels as part of his cover identity. The plan was for Sarah to present the evidence to General Morrison during a break in the briefing, while David positioned himself to prevent any attempt by conspiracy members to silence them. The briefing room was exactly what Sarah had expected. A sterile conference room, with high-tech presentation equipment and an atmosphere of serious purpose. About 20 people were in attendance, including several faces that Sarah recognized from David's evidence files. Defense contractors, Pentagon officials, and representatives from various agencies sat around a large conference table discussing budget allocations for classified projects. General Patricia Morrison commanded attention even in a room full of powerful people. A career military officer with an impeccable reputation, she had earned respect through competence and integrity rather than political connections. Sarah could see why David believed Morrison was their best hope for exposing the conspiracy. As the briefing progressed through its agenda, Sarah found herself studying the faces around the table, trying to identify which of these professional-looking people were actually part of a criminal network planning mass murder. The disconnect between their appearance and their actions was disturbing. They looked like any other group of government officials and contractors conducting routine business. About halfway through the briefing, Morrison called for a 15-minute break. This was Sarah's opportunity. As the room emptied, Sarah approached the general, who was reviewing notes at the head of the table. "General Morrison, I'm Sarah Martinez from Phoenix Security Consulting. I have some information that I believe you need to see immediately." Morrison looked up with the polite attention of someone accustomed to being approached by contractors seeking her attention. "Ms. Martinez, if this is about a contract proposal, you should submit it through normal channels." "This isn't about a contract, ma'am. It's about a threat to national security that requires immediate action." Something in Sarah's tone made Morrison pause and study her more carefully. What kind of threat? Sarah opened her briefcase and removed a folder containing selected excerpts from David's evidence. "There's a conspiracy within the defense and intelligence communities to stage a terrorist attack on American soil. The attack is planned for within the next week, and some of the people involved are in this room." Morrison's expression shifted from polite attention to sharp focus. "That's a very serious accusation, Ms. Martinez. Do you have evidence to support it?" Sarah handed over the folder, watching as Morrison's eyes widened while scanning the documents. "Financial records showing payoffs to government officials. Communication intercepts proving coordination with terrorist groups. Photographs of American military equipment being delivered to enemy forces." "Where did you get this information?" Morrison asked quietly. "From someone who has been working undercover for 12 years to gather evidence against this network. General, they have a nuclear device. They're planning to detonate it in Washington, D.C. to create the justification for implementing martial law and suspending constitutional government." Morrison looked around the empty briefing room, apparently considering the implications of what Sarah was telling her. "If this information is accurate, then some of the people I work with every day are traitors planning mass murder." "Yes, ma'am. And they know that their cover has been blown. My family has already been targeted for assassination. If we don't act immediately, they'll either complete their attack or disappear to try again later." Morrison closed the folder and looked directly at Sarah. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Order the immediate arrest of everyone identified in those documents. Coordinate with the FBI to locate and secure the nuclear device, and place the Pentagon under lockdown until we can be certain that all conspiracy members have been identified and captured." "That's a significant action based on intelligence from an unknown source," Morrison said carefully. "I'll need to verify this information before I can act on it." Sarah felt a flash of frustration, but she understood Morrison's position. A general couldn't order mass arrests based solely on documents provided by a stranger, no matter how compelling those documents might be. "General, what would it take to convince you that this threat is real?" Morrison considered the question carefully. "I would need corroboration from a trusted source, preferably someone with first-hand knowledge of the conspiracy. What if I could provide that?" Before Morrison could respond, the briefing room door opened, and several people began returning from the break. Sarah recognized two faces from David's files. Colonel Robert Hayes, a Pentagon official who had been taking bribes from defense contractors, and Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a weapons specialist who had been providing technical information to terrorist groups. Both Hayes and Chen noticed Sarah talking to Morrison and exchanged a quick glance that confirmed their involvement in the conspiracy. Sarah realized that her presence at the briefing had already been noted by the wrong people. Morrison apparently noticed the exchange as well. "Ms. Martinez, I think we should continue this conversation in my office." As they left the briefing room together, Sarah caught sight of David at the end of the hallway. He was dressed as a Pentagon maintenance worker pushing a cart of cleaning supplies, but Sarah could see the tension in his posture. Something was wrong. David made eye contact with Sarah and gave a subtle hand signal that she recognized from their military training. Danger. Immediate threat. Get ready to move. Sarah's heart rate spiked as she realized that their plan was falling apart. Somehow, the conspiracy members had identified them and were preparing to take action. "General," Sarah said urgently, "we need to call security immediately. The people I warned you about know that I'm here, and they're going to try to stop us from exposing them." Morrison reached for her phone, but before she could dial, the lights in the hallway suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. "Lockdown protocol," Morrison said grimly. "Someone has triggered a security alert." Sarah knew that David must have activated the alert to prevent the conspiracy members from escaping, but it also meant that they were now trapped in the building with people who would kill them to protect their operation. "General, we need to get to a secure location where you can coordinate with outside agencies," Sarah said. "The people involved in this conspiracy have access to Pentagon security systems. We can't trust normal communication channels." Morrison nodded and began moving toward a secured area deeper in the building. As they walked, Sarah could hear shouting and the sound of running feet from other parts of the Pentagon. Whether those sounds represented security forces responding to a legitimate threat or conspiracy members trying to eliminate witnesses, Sarah couldn't tell. They reached Morrison's office, which was located in a secured section of the building with additional access controls. Morrison immediately moved to a special communication system that allowed her to contact external agencies without going through normal Pentagon channels. "This is General Morrison. I need an immediate response team from FBI counterterrorism. We have a credible threat of nuclear terrorism involving Pentagon personnel. I'm transmitting evidence files now." As Morrison transmitted David's evidence to the FBI, Sarah kept watch at the office door. She could see figures moving in the hallway outside, but couldn't tell if they were security personnel or threats. "General, how long until the FBI arrives?" Sarah asked. 20 minutes minimum," Morrison replied. "They need time to mobilize a team and get through Pentagon security." 20 minutes felt like an eternity when Sarah knew that conspiracy members were somewhere in the building, probably trying to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. She also knew that David was still out there, potentially facing multiple enemies on his own. "I need to find my brother," Sarah said. "He's the source of this intelligence, and he's in immediate danger. Miss Martinez, you're a civilian. You should stay here where it's safe." "With respect, General, nowhere in this building is safe until we've identified and captured all the conspiracy members. And my brother has been fighting these people for 12 years. If anyone can survive what's happening out there, it's him." Morrison looked like she wanted to argue, but the sound of gunfire from somewhere in the building made the decision for both of them. The conspiracy members had decided to fight rather than surrender, and innocent people were going to be caught in the crossfire. "All right," Morrison said, reaching into her desk to retrieve a sidearm. "But we stick together, and we head for the nearest security station where we can coordinate with legitimate personnel." Sarah accepted a weapon from Morrison's emergency stash and checked its condition with the automatic efficiency of someone with military training. As they prepared to leave the office, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from David. "Nuclear device located. Sub-basement level. They're trying to activate it early. Need immediate assistance." Sarah showed the message to Morrison, who immediately understood the implications. If they detonate that device inside the Pentagon, it won't just kill everyone in the building. The radioactive contamination will make Washington, D.C. uninhabitable for decades. "How do we get to the sub-basement?" Sarah asked. "Service elevators, but they'll be monitoring all the normal access points. Then we find an abnormal access point." Morrison led Sarah through a maze of secured corridors toward a maintenance area that provided access to the building's infrastructure. As they moved, they could hear the sounds of a running battle somewhere above them. Security forces were engaging the conspiracy members, but Sarah couldn't tell who was winning. The maintenance area contained access points to utility tunnels that ran throughout the Pentagon. Morrison used her general's access codes to override the security locks, and they descended into a network of tunnels that most people didn't even know existed. "These tunnels connect to every part of the building," Morrison explained as they made their way through the narrow passages. "They were originally designed as emergency evacuation routes, but they also provide access to all the building's critical systems." As they navigated the tunnels, Sarah tried to process everything that was happening. 6 days ago, she had been a security consultant living a quiet life with her family. Now she was crawling through Pentagon utility tunnels with a general, trying to prevent nuclear terrorism by a conspiracy that included some of the most powerful people in the government. They reached a ladder that led up to the sub-basement level. Morrison went first, using her access codes to open a maintenance hatch that emerged in a storage room. Sarah followed, and they found themselves in a dimly lit area filled with mechanical equipment and storage containers. The sound of voices led them toward a large open area where Sarah could see multiple figures working around what appeared to be a sophisticated piece of equipment. The nuclear device was smaller than she had expected, about the size of a large suitcase, but she could see enough technical details to know that it was real. David was there, but he was on his knees with his hands behind his head while two armed men kept weapons trained on him. A third person, a woman Sarah recognized as Dr. Bose, Elizabeth Chen from the briefing, was working on the device's control panel. "Status report," demanded a voice that Sarah recognized as belonging to Colonel Hayes. 15 minutes until detonation," Chen replied. "The timer is locked in. Even if we wanted to stop it now, we can't." Sarah realized that the conspiracy members had decided to activate the device rather than let it be captured as evidence. They were willing to die along with everyone else in the Pentagon rather than face exposure and prosecution. Morrison whispered urgently into her radio, calling for immediate evacuation of the building and requesting a bomb disposal team. But Sarah knew that 15 minutes wasn't enough time to evacuate the Pentagon, and certainly wasn't enough time to safely disarm a nuclear device. The only option was to stop the people who had activated it and hope that David knew enough about the device to disarm it. Sarah counted 5 conspiracy members in the area around the nuclear device. She and Morrison had 2 weapons between them and the element of surprise, but they would be facing people who were desperate and willing to die for their cause. Morrison apparently reached the same conclusion. "We go on my signal," she whispered. "Take down as many as you can, but prioritize protecting your brother. He's our only hope of disarming that device." Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar calm that came over her before combat. Everything else faded away except the mission. Stop the nuclear device, save the people in the building, protect her family. Morrison held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. They moved. Sarah's first shot took down one of the men guarding David. Morrison's shot disabled Chen before she could activate any additional safeguards on the device. The remaining conspiracy members tried to return fire, but Sarah and Morrison had positioned themselves with good cover, while their enemies were exposed in the open area. In less than 30 seconds, the immediate threat was neutralized. David scrambled toward the nuclear device, while Sarah and Morrison secured the area. "Can you disarm it?" Sarah called out to her brother. David was already working on the device's control panel, his fingers flying over the technical interface. "Maybe, but I need 10 minutes of uninterrupted work, and we only have 12 minutes until detonation." "Then you better work fast," Sarah replied, taking up a defensive position to make sure no one interrupted him. As David worked to save thousands of lives, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this point. The night that had started with 3 burglars breaking into her house had led to this moment in a Pentagon sub-basement, fighting to prevent nuclear terrorism. But as she watched her brother work with focused determination to disarm the device, Sarah realized that everything that had happened had been leading to this confrontation. David's 12 years of undercover work, his careful positioning of Sarah's career, even the attack on her family had all been part of a larger plan to bring down this conspiracy and prevent this attack. With 7 minutes remaining on the timer, David looked up from the control panel with relief written across his face. "Got it," he said. "The device is disarmed." Sarah felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her as the adrenaline began to fade. They had done it. They had stopped the conspiracy, prevented the nuclear attack, and exposed the corruption that had threatened the country's security. But as she looked around at the destruction and chaos they had left in their wake, Sarah knew that their lives would never be the same. There would be investigations, trials, media attention, and probably years of legal complications, as the full scope of the conspiracy was unraveled. "What happens now?" she asked David. "Now we go home," he replied, putting his arm around his sister's shoulders. "We've done our job. It's time to let other people handle the cleanup." As they waited for the FBI team to arrive and take custody of the evidence, Sarah thought about Miguel, Emma, and Carlos waiting at the safe house. They would be able to return to Phoenix, but their old life was gone forever. They would have to build something new, something stronger, something that could withstand the kind of threats they now knew existed in the world. But they would build it together, and that was enough. The word that had stopped Sarah in her hallway 6 days ago had been Mama, spoken by the brother she thought she had lost. That word had changed everything, had set in motion a chain of events that saved thousands of lives and preserved the country's security. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the most important battles were fought not by armies or governments, but by families who were willing to risk everything to protect what they loved. And sometimes, one word was all it took to change the world. She tore through Intruders, Then one word made her freeze.